the funniest story, how I met Raven. I was never. I'm my obviously my mind and my thoughts process have changed on all this, but I was not an ECW fan. I just caught enough of it to realize it was, to me, just hardcore stuff, trying to Willy one up everything they'd ever done. And I never took the time when I was younger to understand those guys could wrestle. There were some really good wrestlers at ECW, and they told really good stories. And so while the over the top violence kind of turned me off to getting into it, I was out one night with a friend of mine at the power plant. We were in Atlanta, went out to a bar, and Raven came in. Had just came down from Philly and left ECW to start at WCW. And the guy I was with was Johnny Attitude, who actually passed away last summer. And he was a big name at the power plant at the time. And I was there and did some Saturday night stuff. He said, "Hey, there's Raven. Let's go say hello to him." And I told Johnny, I said, "You know what? I don't know him. I'm not going to go over and bother him. I just don't think that's appropriate." And then Johnny's like, "I know him. I've met him." Like, go ahead. So Johnny goes over and talks to Raven. I'm sitting alone. And Johnny comes back. He said, "Hey, man, Raven wants to meet you." Why does Raven want to meet me? I mean, I've never been on TV. I was just down at the power plant. And no, he said, I told him you were a personal trainer before, and he's looking to get in some of the best shape of his life. He wants to talk to you about hiring you as a personal trainer. And so I walked over, introduced myself, and he put me through my paces. He asked some really great questions and really dug in with how I trained and why I thought this worked, whatever, and hired me on the spot as his new personal trainer. So I left the bar that night, Raven's new personal trainer. And I probably trained him for maybe a week or maybe 2 weeks possibly. And because I was out of town every weekend doing indie shows outside of Georgia, he was typically home on the weekends because at the time WCW, they weren't doing a lot of house shows. They had the pay-per-views and Monday Night Nitro. And so I went from being his personal trainer to being his personal assistant. He actually paid me each week to run errands for him. And when he first asked me, I was like, I'd sold my gym by this point. And I'm like, I think he gave me $300 and $350 a week just to run errands for him. And I'm like, how bad can that be? And it's some extra money. And then he started getting upset because when he was home, I was always on the road wrestling, or when he was on the road wrestling, I was home. And we were sitting in a bar one night. He's like, "Man, I'm tired of you not being, on the road with me or being around." And I'm like, "Well, if I was on TV, that'd be great. It would work out." And he goes, "Hey, Stevie Richards had just gotten hurt and left." And he called Terry Taylor. We were sitting in a bar. And this is about 6, 7 months maybe after I went to the power plant, 5, 6, somewhere in there. And he called Terry, and I only heard Raven's side of it. And he's like, "Hey, do you mind if I put Brad Kane in the flock? I really think he's good." And, "Oh, really?" Not because he said, "I'm going to bring him to Nitro on Monday if that's okay." And he goes, "No, okay. You're right. I forgot. Okay, thank you." Click. And so this is a Thursday night, and I'm expecting to go maybe to Nitro on Monday. Raven gets off the phone. He said, "Hey, we got a pay-per-view this weekend, Palace at Auburn Hills in Detroit. Terry wants you to start this weekend." So it's Thursday night. I've got dark hair, ponytail. No, I'd shave my ponytail. I'm shaved, dark, long, short, dark hair. And Raven looks at me and he's like, "We need to turn you into, you don't look like a star." He said, "I think you should be Billy Idol." And I'm like, kind of look at him funny. Now imagine Thursday night at 12 o'clock, midnight, 1:30, I'm getting this news. And I got to catch a flight Saturday morning at like 8 or 9. And he wants me to go from dark hair and no gimmick, no character, no nothing, to go establish all this stuff in one day. So I ran to a place called Little 5 Points. They got the black leather pants and the boots and the chains and all the stuff. And, that's how Lodi was really born. It was our off-screen relationship was very much like our on-screen relationship. I really was his personal assistant and that kind of thing. So that's how it got started. And every time I get a chance to thank him personally, which I talk fairly regularly, at least once a month through text or phone call. And that's the one man who did more for my wrestling career than anyone else ever. So I can never repay him for all the stuff he did. And by taking a chance on me, because he'd never even seen me work a live show before. So he just had that much faith. And so for him and Terry Taylor had seen me work, and I'd done some enhancement jobs down at Disney at the Universal Studio tapings or whatever. But for those guys to take a chance and put me in that spot, again, I'm just thankful. And it happened so fast, so that was another thing that was just kind of unheard of.
How was it for you to go from being someone who was relatively unknown to then being on WCW Nitro every week and being on pay-per-view? Like, was that a little bit intimidating for you, or did you sort of go in and just blend straight into it? Like how did that adapt for your lifestyle at the time?
I feel like my on screen character absolutely fit into the flock and my the things Raven gave me to do and what Lodi meant to the flock. I felt like I did a really good job of following his direction on that, and he basically turned me into, his old Johnny Polo gimmick, kind of the goofy guy who's there to be cannon fodder for the rest of the flock. And that's what I was alluding to earlier. He gave me some really good ideas on the character. And he gave Kidman all of his stuff, ideas on the character. And I feel like Raven took the time to develop all these characters. The guy necessarily into whatever it was Raven gave. So they halfway did it or wanted to be a tough guy, not necessarily a flunky. And I think the guys that listened to Raven, as far as Kidman and myself, I think got over with the fans better than some of the guys who just kind of blended into the flock and was just another, body.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I actually heard a rumor, well, I don't know if it's actually fact or not, that Lodi, and you mentioned he wanted you to be Billy Idol, and Idol spelled backwards is Lodi. Is that correct? Is that how the name was?
Oh, and it was the funny thing. I started in October, and Billy Idol has a copyright on his look. In other words, you couldn't dye your hair blonde and wear black leather pants and do the sneer and the chains and the glove and call yourself Idol.
Wow.
And because if we infringe on, I think it's up to 68% of the character that's been copyrighted, you're in violation. And our lawyers at WCW looked at it and said, "You're pretty much 100 on 100. You're pretty much Billy Idol, basically." So we can't call you Idol. That's illegal. And so we just turned it around, and that's where Lodi came from. It's just Idol spelled backwards, and here we are. Strangely enough, 23 years later, and I'm still Lodi. So
exactly, man. But how did the signs come into play? Because I know around the same time, maybe a couple of years before that, ECW had Sign Guy Dudley,
yeah,
and you started coming to the signs. Was that like an intentional sort of take from that, or was that just like just coincidence?
No, it wasn't absolutely. There are no coincidences, right? And, Raven came from ECW, and the one thing with Raven is, he helped develop so many of the characters that Paul E used at ECW. He has, like I said, a great mind, and of course, the sign gimmick had been done by Sign Guy Dudley, and he jokingly told me later when we talked, he said, "Man, I first hated it when you did it because I felt like I was doing it first." Blah blah. I said, "But you got it on the big stage." He said, "Go with it." And so we made, we're friends, and got along great after that. And I think Raven had some influence on him doing that at ECW. So Raven kind of felt like, "Hey, I came up with this once before, we can steal it again." And I jokingly tell everybody, obviously 23 years later, I'm still carrying signs. And so my line is, if you can't work, you better have a freaking gimmick, And that's a gimmick, I can't let that one go.
But as far as like the signs go, like who was it up to you to make the signs and be creative to come up with them, or was that sort of Raven's deal, or did they have someone who was in creative doing that?
Within a couple of months, maybe even shorter time than that, maybe 6 weeks, I pretty much came up with the overwhelming majority of the signs. The funny thing was Raven would give me some ideas in the beginning, and sometimes I'd have to kibosh them because they were just too risque to put on TV. But as the sign gimmick and the Lodi character started getting over a little more, a great thing happened with all the boys. They felt like, they wanted to help. And so a lot of guys would come by as I'm drawing my signs back, write my signs backstage. Dean Malenko was the king of this. He'd be like, "Hey, Lodi, why don't you use," and he would give me something to put on the sign. I'm like, "Bro, that is brilliant." So I got some input from other people, but probably 75 to 80% of my signs were my ideas. And towards the end, when I was with Lenny, still doing the signs, the office came to me, and I can't remember if it was Terry Taylor at the time or somebody else. I tried to push the envelope on some things. Being a political science major, I made fun of Bill Clinton when we were in D.C. Being a heel, it's always good to make fun of people in the town because it's only going to obviously get you heat, and it's easy to do.
Yeah.
But at some point, somebody higher up sent Terry Taylor or Kevin Sullivan one, said, "Hey, Lodi, you got a little overboard with the signs, what you're putting on TV. We have to approve them now before you take them out. So I was like, oh, that's just clipping my wings, you know? But I learned in this business, you know, you always just do it and play stupid and, you know, take the blame later as opposed to asking for permission. And so within a day or two of them, you know, bringing my signs into the office, is this good? Is this good? Is this good? Yeah, that'll work. Take that one out. Take that one out. You can use those. And this may be the rebel in me or just trying to push the envelope anyway. I would take 4 signs into the office and show them to them. I forgot who had to show, and they're like, okay, those 4 are good. Well, I'd leave 2 or 3 out. You know, as soon as I walk to the office, I go right over and pick up the other ones and get them on TV. And it's like, you know, somebody would ask later on, hey, did you get those signs approved? And I'm like, oh, yeah, they said it was good. We're good. And so, you know, again, like I said, some were a little risque and some of them were just fun.